Just 3 days after being released from his criminal case and coming back to Maryland, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is once again back in ICE custody.
The Trump administration is now planning on sending him to Uganda, a country he has no ties to. That will have to wait. We're going to have to wait. A federal judge has stopped Abrego Garcia's deportation for now, so it's not happening at this point. She says the Trump administration is absolutely forbidden from removing him from the continental U.S. until a hearing can be held. Of course, yesterday he surrendered to ICE after being released. The Maryland father held a rally outside the courthouse in Baltimore. Joining us now to talk more about the Abrego Garcia case is Maryland Representative Glenn Ivey. So good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Can you describe the chrysalis of this case and what it means?
Well, I mean, it's been a pretty disappointing saga, I would say. It began with the Trump administration deporting him illegally to El Salvador. They acknowledged that they'd made the mistake, but they refused to bring it back, saying they didn't have the authority to do it. The Supreme Court then said he does get a day in court, he does get due process. Fourth Circuit went even further and said bring it back. So they brought him back, but they didn't just bring him back. They charged him with federal crimes first, and then put it under the guise of extradition. So he got back briefly and had to be, he was charged with the cases in Tennessee. That judge reviewed the case and said, you know what, I don't think he's a threat to the public and I don't think he's a flight risk. So I'm gonna release him and let him go home to Maryland until his case, next phase of his case comes up. And that apparently angered the Trump administration. They said they were gonna detain him and deport him to Uganda, and that's what they started trying to do yesterday.
Why Kilmar Abrego Garcia, in your mind? Why has this man sort of become the name that everybody has made sort of synonymous with the mass deportation effort? He's just one person.
Yeah, he's just one person, and sadly there are literally hundreds, maybe at this point thousands of people who are in similar circumstances. The Trump administration deported 50 Venezuelans to the jail in El Salvador. Even though they were here, their paperwork was fine here in the United States, and they hadn't committed any crimes here in El Salvador or Venezuela. They ended up making a swap with them to Venezuela so they could be released. But again, these are people who hadn't committed any kind of offense. They certainly aren't a danger to the public. The Trump administration said they were going to focus on the worst of the worst, the violent offenders, murderers, rapists, and the like. Unfortunately, this is far from the truth. Most of the people they're picking up are, people just trying to work for a living and get through day to day. They're not a threat to our
Make about the fact that the Trump administration wants to send Abrego to Uganda specifically because he doesn't want to agree to a plea deal that would give him a life in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it's a punitive, mean-spirited move. The Department of Justice that I worked for is now looking more like the Department of Revenge and Retribution. This is an effort, to try and pressure him into accepting a plea instead of just letting him move forward with the court proceedings. They charged him with these criminal offenses. Now they're not going to give him his day in court. They're going to deport him and send him to Uganda instead of allowing him to, have a chance to defend himself in court and get the judge and jury trial that the Constitution guarantees. That's not right. That's not the American way. And hopefully we can pull the Trump administration back, and the courts will pull the Trump administration back on course so he can get the same kinds of protections that he's guaranteed under the law.
We have one of Mr. Abrego Garcia's attorneys on in the last hour, and I want to ask you the same question I asked her. At the end of all this, do you foresee any circumstance in which Kilmar Abrego Garcia is allowed to stay in the United States?
I don't know. I mean, the Trump administration has been so relentless in trying to essentially crush this man and his family. It's hard to say that there's a light at the end of the tunnel for him. But, again, he's got court cases. He's got excellent lawyers working for him to try and help him get through the immigration process. I don't know how the criminal case in Tennessee would play out if that's allowed to move forward. But, I believe in the American system of justice, at least the way it used to work. I'm really disappointed with the way the Trump administration is, turning the Department of Justice into a tool that he's using to punish his enemies or people he happens to be mad at the time.
Hey, I want to turn quickly to the federal takeover here in D.C. of law enforcement and the law enforcement presence. Do you think that Congress is going to come back and extend the takeover of the police department for a longer period of time, and have the National Guard here?
Well, the Republicans control the Senate and the House, and none of them have shown much willingness to stand up to him under any circumstances, with the exception of Congressman Tom Massey from Kentucky. So if they want to do that and extend the 30 days, they can. But at the end of the day, I think it's pretty clear at this point that this is just a show. You got guys walking around in camouflage carrying assault weapons, but they're walking around, near the Washington Monument, in tourist traps and the like. What we really could use, and I think I saw this when I was state's attorney in Prince George's, and I know we liked this when I was the assistant U.S. attorney in D.C. back in the 90s. Yeah, federal agents, DEA, FBI, marshals. You want to bring guys in who are actually trained in how to perform law enforcement functions and can add to the resources. That's great, but these soldiers aren't trained to do that. They're not trained for civilian law enforcement. The fact that they're carrying the assault weapons, but no intermediate force, like say, for example, a taser or a pepper spray, demonstrates that they're not up to the task for this kind of function. Plus, they're not trained for things like the Mirandizing witnesses or suspects at the right time. Because if you mess that up, whatever the violent offense could be that was committed could get thrown out of court on constitutional grounds. So it's bad from a public safety standpoint. It's $1 million a day and a waste of money that when you could actually restore the $1.1 billion that the Republicans are retaining instead of letting the District of Columbia have the money that belongs in their coffers so they can hire more cops and teachers on their own.
We got about 90 seconds left. I know you don't represent the area of Baltimore, but we have heard the president talk about perhaps deploying the National Guard there. As a Maryland resident, as a former law enforcement officer yourself, a prosecutor, what would you make of that decision if he decides to go through with it?
It's the same sort of thing. Baltimore, Chicago is another one he's mentioned too. Ironically, DC, Baltimore, and Chicago have seen crime rates going down, especially homicides. And that's due in part because the Biden administration provided assistance with things like intervention and prevention programs. Enforcement is great, but enforcement alone is not the most effective way to go. You need a comprehensive and coherent approach that includes enforcement, intervention, and prevention strategies. That's what drove crime down in Baltimore and DC. What they could use is more of the resources that help to do that. But instead, the Trump administration, the first thing he did was shut down the Office of Gun Violence Reduction. And the gun violence could really be, reduced in addition by sensible gun control laws. Banning ghost guns, for example. I think there's 180 Democrats who've signed on to that bill in the House. There are 0 Republicans, even though ghost guns are clearly only useful to criminals who want to evade being apprehended.
Question about Democrats. Do you think Democrats can get their act together and do something cohesive that will help attract more voters once again?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I hear that a lot. And we did lose the elections for sure. But I think you're about 1% numbers. And the reason we lost the House was because the Republicans gerrymandered North Carolina and switched 3 seats from D to R. So there's a four vote margin or so in the House. I think we're going to retake the House and we potentially retake the Senate if he continues to do things like impose tariffs that raise costs on regular people, cut back on Medicaid and other types of health care coverage that people desperately need, especially kids and seniors. I think those are the kinds of things that will really make people think twice. And the United States, I think, did a lot of positive things during the Biden era, including the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill that gave us more expansion and more access to the use of the internet, even for people who live in rural and low-income areas. And I think we did a lot with respect to helping with the child, the child tax credit that really helped families. In addition, getting more kids out of poverty than we've ever had before. We can go back to that. We just have a chance to do it in 2026.
So this is really only a yes and no answer because it's all we have time for. So you don't think redistricting will hurt Democrats?
It depends.
Okay.
It really does. I think we have to fight fire with fire.
All right. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivey.